Hi, welcome to Pennsylvania Newsmakers, and thanks for watching. Well, the folks have voted, the votes have been counted, and the big question before the Pennsylvania electorate today is the reform movement alive or is it dead? That and a little examination of college tuitions, all of that following these words.
This is Pennsylvania Newsmakers, a fast-paced, unrehearsed weekly discussion with and about the leaders who shape your world. And now, here's your host, Terry Madonna.
All right, thanks for watching again. Well, we've got a fascinating show. We're going to delve into the election results from Tuesday. Some important trends may be evident. Joining me is Dale Davenport. He's the editorial page editor of the Harrisburg Patriot-News. Robert Swift with Times-Shamrock. Is it News? Times-Shamrock what?
Times-Shamrock Newspapers.
Newspapers. How many of them? Come on, put a shameless plug in.
Scranton Times-Tribune.
You got it.
Expert Citizens Voice.
All right, and as often is the case, one of our regular contributors, Brad Bumsted, with the Pittsburgh Tribune-Review. All right, Dale, let me start with you. Look, every single jurist that was standing for retention won except one, and that was really not a question of the pay hike.
Right.
The big question is, did the reformers overreach by going after so many judges? What do you think?
They could have. They could have. And I think that the reform movement is centered in Harrisburg, really, right. And of this group that was asking for a no vote on most of the judges. And so you saw in 4 or 5 counties in and around Harrisburg, there were a lot of no votes.
No votes, sure.
But elsewhere in the state, they just didn't have quite the traction. I think part of that is that it's a local story here for folks. A lot of folks here are work for state government or retired from state government. They pay a lot of attention to
that's a good point.
Things and on the Hill, and so they're much more engaged. And I think that had a big part to play with.
You know, Robert, that's a good point. I mean, we do tend, you know, that what goes on in Harrisburg maybe should stay in Harrisburg, but I know you try to make sure you reporters that it gets out of Harrisburg. You do a great job doing it, too. Where do you think this puts this reform movement? I mean, give me your take on that.
Last night, Russ Diamond, one of the organizers, said that they're going to start in 11 weeks. It's going to be time to start gathering petitions to run for a state legislative seat. So they're out there going to recruit, but maybe they'll have another group of candidates sitting on the rotunda steps next January, but it's still going to be, that's obviously going to have more hurdles now, trying to get candidates who can possibly challenge incumbents after this vote here. They're going to look, challengers are going to look at the vote too, would-be challengers, and maybe take a second look.
But just for the record, Brad, 66 of 67 won. They won pretty convincingly, at least 60-40, except in this one case where not arguably it was not about with these reform groups. You know, Gene Stilp with the inflatable pink pig, which morphed into a pink bus, going around the state, vote no. You've got Operation Clean Sweep with Russ Diamond. You've got Tim Potts' Democracy Rising. All these reform groups trying to change the culture in Harrisburg. Did they, same question to you, did they overreach?
I don't know whether they overreached. I mean, you take the best shot you can. Yeah. But I do think the results clearly show that particular aspect of the reform movement is on life support. Yeah. And, you know, there was a rejection. What happened, I think, is that voters were unwilling to make the connection between anger they may have had 2 years ago at legislators and to connect that with judges, because the Supreme Court, of course, had reinstated the pay raise for judges. And they didn't make that connection. And I think that, you know, that's part of what was going on here. And I think that, look, you know, a pink bus dressed up like a pig can't compete with television ads that Tom Saylor was putting on.
Yeah, go ahead.
You know, in an election, an off-year election like this, when you have a low turnout, those people who turn out to vote are people who pay attention. You're more likely to get people who understand issues. Right. And in a case like this, they can look at their local county judge, they can look at appellate judges on Commonwealth or Superior Court and say, these guys had nothing to do with that pay raise.
See, that's a great point. I mean, I made the argument that, you know, when chatting with you folks in the press, that what does a judge in Allegheny County or Potter County or York County have to do with a pay hike? They took it, but it was still constitutional, Robert.
And that was, and also if you look back at 2005, you had this weird electoral map. You had South Central Pennsylvania and Southwest Pennsylvania joining in these no votes
right.
against Judge Nigro. This time, the western part of this coalition, went off the bandwagon.
Right.
And that that did not happen, and that's one reason. I think a big reason why these judges were retained.
Okay, when we come back, we want to take a quick break. What does this mean for open records law? What does it mean for ethics? What does it mean for campaign finance reform? Things that the reformers and others have been trying to accomplish in Harrisburg. We'll ask our panel that and more following these words.
This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is presented by the Pennsylvania Chamber of Business and Industry, the statewide voice of business. This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is presented by Pennsylvania Medical Society. Doctors and patients, preserve the relationship. And by the Pennsylvania Manufacturers Association. Business in Pennsylvania is our business.
Hi, welcome back to Journalist Roundtable with Dale Davenport, Robert Swift, and Brad Bumsted, journalists all. Brad, let me start with you. All right, the big question of the day is, I think there may have been a collective sigh of relief. 253 members of the General Assembly saw that not a single judge except one was taken out. What does this mean for the things that you all have been writing about and the legislature has been circling but not doing very much with in terms of open records, campaign finance reform, ethics? What do you think is going to happen?
Very clearly, this does not bode well for reform movements in the state legislature. For starters, a lot of senior legislators who were maybe looking at retirement if some of these judges were defeated now can say, well, maybe I don't have to do that. And I think more importantly, there's going to be a sense within the legislature that maybe we don't have to go so far with these reforms. Maybe we don't have to do a lot of them. Some may still happen, I'm not saying that, but I think there's not going to be a fear that they could be thrown out of office if they don't do it.
Dale, the pressure does seem to be off a bit. I mean, maybe we're making too much of this, and there still is. I mean, maybe voting for judges is very different than the kinds of things I know that you've been running in your paper, stories about the reform movement and the reformers' activities. What's your sense about what you think the impetus will be?
The members of the legislature who are true reformers, some of them came in last time.
That's right.
Others who have climbed on, they will still be vocal, and they will be pushing certain things, but and certain issues. But there is, as Brad points out, I'm sure a sense of relief, and they may not go as far on open records, for example, as they might have had they thought that the populace was fully engaged in specific reform issues.
Look at it the other way, Terry. Suppose most of these people had been defeated. We'd be sitting here today saying, oh my gosh, look at this is going to result in widespread reform. They're going to react to this. So,
Robert, what about the 25, the 25 state senators who were up, many of whom voted for the pay hike? Russ Diamond, and Russ isn't here, obviously he's not a journalist, indicated that, they're going to target and focus on those 25. Do you think they're still got the proverbial political bullseye on them?
Well, I think the mechanics of the pay raise part is who took what and when, who gave it back is over. But what will happen, I think, is the two parties will co-opt the issue. And they did this once before in the late 90s. They'll go after weak incumbents who may have maybe it's an expense issue they have, maybe it's something else, and they'll do some opposition research and throw it at them, little bits of the reform stuff, like I said, some who maybe caught in bonus gate, the probe. And so they'll use it to cherry pick seats they want to pick up, but it would not be in that way.
I see what you mean. And each party will use it selectively to try to pick up gains. The other point, Dale, it seems to me, is that one of the things they can do, and I think Brad alluded to, just do a little bit. I mean, just sort of do a little bit with campaign finance, a little bit with open records, a little bit with the smoking ban. Now, not all of that is directly related to reform, but these are pretty hot issues.
Sure. The open records, and they promised a vote coming up here this next week, that is not quite where reformers want it to be, especially in the House version. And this may take a little bit of the reform pressure off of that, for example. And we'll see how that plays out on the vote on the House version this week.
The joke is they'll rename it the Personnel Protection Act.
The Personnel Protection Act. Brad.
Well, I just think that the other shoe hasn't dropped yet either. and this has also been alluded to, and that's bonus gate.
Yeah.
You have a state attorney general out investigating corruption in the legislature in all 4 caucuses. Yeah. We don't know what's going to come of that. We don't know if anybody's going to be indicted. But if there are widespread indictments, if it's a massive investigation, that could add fuel to the reform movement down the road. So it's not going to come from Russ Diamond and these folks anymore. It's sort of in Tom Corbett's
But they will pick it up. I mean, the reform groups would pick it up. You guys will write the stories about it because obviously it's news if there's an investigation.
But they're not driving it now. It's going to come from another direction.
All right, we're going to switch gears. We're going to take a break. When we come back, I want to talk about I-80, the tolling of I-80. It's back in the news. Republicans are not, feeling some heat on the decision to toll 80, and there's rumors, and more than rumors, there's been statements made by Republicans in the House in particular that they might well come up with another plan should the federal government block state governments, our state government's plan to toll Route 80. We'll do that and more after these words.
This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is brought to you by Pennsylvania Credit Union Association. Pennsylvania Credit Unions, where people are worth more than money. To find a credit union that is right for you, check out ibelong.org. And by the Energy Association of Pennsylvania, Pennsylvania's energy information source. This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is presented by the State System of Higher Education. 14 state-owned universities. The state system is the largest provider of higher education in Pennsylvania. And by the Hospital and Health System Association of Pennsylvania, working towards a healthy Pennsylvania.
Hi, welcome back to Pennsylvania Newsmakers for a Journalist Roundtable. Robert Swift from Times-Shamrock Newspapers. Let me start with you. Here we go. Tolling of I-80, the legislature did it. It was to generate close to $1 billion for roads and bridges on the one hand, and they can't use that money for mass transit, but they can raise the fees, accelerate the fee increases on the Pennsylvania Turnpike. Republicans in the northern tier especially, you're part of the state now, not happy about it. What's going on with it?
They say it's the #1 issue in their districts. Really? Senator Gorner told me that this week. The Turnpike Commission is going to add you're going to have public meetings starting this week across the corridor. That's going to get on the plan.
The I-80 corridor.
From like Sharon all the way to East Stroudsburg. That's going to get people going. And in the Senate, you can start to see Republicans, they're trying to come up with an alternative to the tolling. They figure they have time, because their bet is that the feds won't approve it, and they're looking at this, what they call this private-public partnership for the Turnpike.
For the Turnpike, yeah. I mean, there have been discussions in the House and the Senate, I think, informally with members about that. Now, what is this, Brad? What is the sense of this? We've got a law for everyone. There's a state law that now says how this will get done. 80 will be tolled. Turnpike fees will go up for everybody. The feds have to approve it. Governor's on board.
I think there's a belief among a lot of lawmakers that the I-80 tolling will fall through. It'll put a big hole in the transportation funding bill. They'll need to make up that revenue somehow, so they're working on alternatives now. Backdrop to all of this is back in his budget address in February, Governor Rendell talked about leasing the Turnpike.
Yeah.
Legislature didn't want anything to do with it, brushed it off the shelf, wouldn't deal with it. They went ahead and did the transportation bill. Not long after that, Governor Rendell comes out and reinvigorates the Turnpike proposal again. So now it's out there. That was, at the time, you wondered, was it crazy?
A ploy?
Yeah, but I think it was brilliant. I mean, basically, he's got this out there while they're talking about public-private partnership, and it creates the ground for compromise.
But Dale, go ahead. He does have a plan. I mean, the governor has a plan. He put pressure on him. The legislature responded. Let's talk about, I want to ask you about the mass transit part of it. The Republicans argued they wanted reform of the mass transit systems, particularly the one in Philadelphia. Did they get it? What's the story there?
No, they haven't really gotten a solid reform, but there are studies out that show that SEPTA has made management improvements, and I think maybe their argument, well, it may still be valid, has lost some of its edge. So I think that's part of it. The federal government is the U.S. Department of Transportation very interested in these public private partnerships on roads and on toll roads. And I think that's sort of a wild card in this too. That's putting pressure on the legislature to come up with an alternative plan.
You mean that Robert, you mentioned this earlier in your comments, that they're likely to say, no, we're not going to approve the tolling of Route 80, that we want a private government partnership with the Turnpike Commission? Is that
the feds are going to? There's other interstates around the country that may have more priority for a tolling dispensation than toll, and I-80 may just fall through. And then so the alternative would be, okay, people don't want to lease it to a company, but how about having more public controls and working with a private company?
Yeah.
Now, Senator Scarnati has sort of laid down a marker. He does not want a foreign company.
Right.
He sort of made that very clear. He wants it to be an American company.
An American company.
And that's sort of where I think the compromise may be headed.
All right, Robert has the last word. Great update. All right, when we come back for the final segment of this show, we're going to talk a little bit about tuitions, a subject that is on the minds of a lot of families in this state as they send their kids off to college. They're there now, but it's next year and the following year. We'll be back in a moment.
This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is presented by Highmark Blue Shield, changing the way health plans work for business with a variety of plan options for employers and more choices for employees. Information is available at highmark.com. Have a greater hand in your company's health. And by the Pennsylvania Healthcare Association, the future of long-term care. This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is presented by Penn Future, where we believe that every environmental victory grows the economy, and by the Pennsylvania Cyber Charter School, bringing educational innovation and freedom to the children of Pennsylvania.
Hi, welcome back to Pennsylvania Newsmakers. Joining me now, as often is the case, is Peter Garland. He's the Executive Vice Chancellor of the State System of Higher Education. Peter, welcome as always.
Thank you.
Recently, the College Board released its annual report entitled Trends in College Pricing, and the report made some arguments about, quote, bad news for Pennsylvania's students. According to the report, attending college in Pennsylvania makes it among the most expensive in the country. You have some problems with that.
Sure.
Let's talk about that.
Pennsylvania is different than most states in how we structure public higher education. We have 4 universities, state-related universities, Penn State, Pitt, Temple, Lincoln, that are sometimes public, sometimes private, receive state subsidy, but are not typical of public universities around the country. More typical are the universities that are part of the state system of higher education, and our tuition structure is completely different. We're less than half the national average in terms of the public tuition rates and total cost of attendance, and in the middle states regions, we're significantly below the average cost of attendance.
Mm-hmm. Now, the tuition cost is a little more than $6,000 now a year at the state system schools.
Tuition and required fees is a little more than $6,000.
All right. Now, maybe I'm wrong about this, but if you multiply that by 4 and you get to something like $24,000 or $25,000, you exclude food and lodging. I mean, people have to live somewhere, and there's food costs anywhere, cell phone costs, and all of that. That's about the price of a new medium-sized car. I'm not exaggerating. I mean, I think we all want to fight hard to keep tuitions down, no needless expenses, but that still is not a bad deal for education. Price of a medium-sized car, you get a 4-year education, and what do we know about once you get a college education?
For a graduate of college, their annual earnings during the course of their lifetime are well over $1 million more than those for a high school graduate. And it's literally starting out of the box from college. The starting salaries are much higher. Their ability to sustain a family, to contribute to the Pennsylvania economy, infinitely better. And as you said, all for the price of a mid-range car.
Yeah, and the other thing that sort of bothers me is, look, I'm a college professor, so, I spend some of the money that Peter and other people have to raise. I'm used to doing that. But the bigger point is, today, when you have a university, any one of your universities, you need a first-rate science building and a science program so you can send young students off to medical school. We want them to go to law school. We want them to go to graduate school. We want them to go into the trades. And in many cases, the colleges, not just the publics, but you've got problems with older facilities. You've got to renovate those facilities. I mean, the capital cost alone have to be enormous.
Yeah, managing the enterprise called higher education and producing the level of quality, having accredited programs, first-rate facilities, is a difficult one for anybody, public or private, to manage. Clearly, our universities have been working in the system, working very aggressively on that to have more accredited programs, newer facilities, and all the while keeping our tuition rates over the past 3 years have been the lowest increases in public higher education in the country.
Yeah, one of the other things that struck me is we've got somewhere in the neighborhood, now you used to work for the State Board of Education, so you're an expert on this. We've got over 120 institutions of higher education. They're not all structured, I mean, they're not all physically located. Many of them are located in one area, and we still have some big areas where there's a gap. How important is the regional business? I mean, it's about access,
Right.
cost is a factor, but there's also a combination of things that go into it, right?
What we know in terms of a lot of the communities in Pennsylvania where the college-going rates are not what they are in other places in the Commonwealth is that having a college, a university, or community college nearby is important. Understanding the price. Unfortunately, most people think that college costs a lot more than it really is going to cost them. All of that is part of the access that needs to happen for higher education. If you're in a small rural part of the state, your exposure and knowledge of higher education oftentimes is limited, and you make, unfortunately, choices that don't lead you to college.
Yeah. I mean, conditioning and culture make a huge difference in terms of what people decide to do. Now, I think you would admit, I mean, look, college isn't for everybody. Right. But you know, colleges that provide, as the state system does, and you know, and the state related as well, a kind of multifaceted experience, so that there ought to be a little something for everybody, so that whatever skills they get, as you point out, the brain drain has consistently been a serious problem in our state.
Right, right. I mean, college is not necessarily for everyone, but some level of post-secondary education and training is absolutely essential for a living, family-sustaining wage in Pennsylvania or any place else in the country. And I think we're all about, in this system as well as the rest of higher education, about providing opportunities for students, whether those are short-term certificate programs all the way to doctorates.
Thanks for the update.
Sure.
Always glad to have you on.
Great.
We'll see you next week for another edition of Pennsylvania Newsmakers, and stay well.